In the criminal justice system, the people are represented by two separate yet equally important groups: the police who investigate crime and the district attorneys who prosecute the offenders. These are their stories.
All right, what do we have here?
Report says at least 6 stab wounds. Last one was right to the face.
It's lipstick on this cigarette.
Pizza box, wine, sign of a struggle.
Probably a low-key date gone wrong. This window's closed, but it's not locked from the inside. In this neighborhood? Check the body out?
I was waiting for you.
Let's do it.
Blackmail.
Looks like nobody did it.
Nope.
You're getting breakfast.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Electoral Dysfunction, the show where comedians and experts debate the news of the week from the safety of their quarantine. I'm your host, Tom Brennan. I want to say a real quick thank you to our friends, the Layoff Kids, for our opening sketch. Daryl Charles, James Heskey, and Mikey Gleason. Follow them on Twitter at Layoff Kids. What a week, huh? This week started with Mitt Romney saying Black Lives Matter and ended with Donald Trump giving a commencement speech while one of the songs from Team America played. It's a crazy time to be alive. And this show, we're here to try and help you through those crazy times, or at least give voice to your terrors. And we have a great panel with us today, and we're really excited to work with them. And I just want to add, as we said the last few weeks, everyone who does this show, our comedians, our panelists, our musicians, performers, do so for free, and they do so because they love the show and they love talking about these issues and sharing their points of view with you. If you would like to thank them for that, please head over to patreon.com/electoral dysfunction. That's patreon.com/electoral dysfunction, and donate a few bucks their way. Many of these people are actors and performers who either lost full jobs or lost, important gigs that help them make their rent every month due to the quarantine and the pandemic. Just a quick note that 100% of any money you send will go directly to them. I won't take any of it. I'm still working full time. But if you want to say thank you to them, I'm sure they'd appreciate it. That's all for me. To my friend and director, Ned Thorne, let's star wipe us over to the panel. Boom. Join me in welcoming this week's panel, and it's a great one. We're very happy to have them with us. First up, a very funny comedian, one of the brains behind Dance Dad TV, and the guy I stole Electoral Dysfunction from. Nate Starkey's here from LA. Hey, Nate, how are you?
Good. Thank you for having me, Tom.
It's good to see you again.
Good to see you again.
Another very funny comedian, maybe the world's best comedian / deacon / Air National Guard member, Hannah Bell with us. Hey, Hannah, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. Just
Good.
for the record, I'm a veteran. I'm no longer in the Guard.
Oh, well, in that case, even better, because we honor veterans here. Next up, another very funny comedian, host of the soon-to-return Comic Book Gurus podcast, coming to us from the greatest city in the world for murals that used to have Frank Rizzo on it, Craig Legons. Hey, Craig, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for having me here, Tom. I just flew in for Wakanda, and boy, are my arms tired.
Yes. That was a solid reference. Well done. Another very funny comedian, our good friend from The Magnet, Ann Herberger, back with us. Hey, Ann.
Hi, Tom. Glad to be here again.
Glad to have you back. And editorial columnist for the New York Daily News. And in my opinion, the bravest man in New York, because he did an editorial fact-checking Governor Cuomo. And Cuomo, as I understand it, holds a grudge. Robert George back with us. Hey, Robert, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you very much. Always great to be here.
I would love that editorial. You held for folks who haven't read it, it's a great piece where he mentions the fact that Andrew Cuomo, while calling out victims of police violence, is quick to mention Abner Louima, who is still alive, even though he references him as dead. And it's a good piece, and I think gets into some nuance of this moment in terms of, it's good that people are allies, but you should have your facts correct.
I mean, if you believe the idea that Black Lives Matter, it's not a good idea to kill off a Black man who's still alive. just rhetorically speaking, just saying.
You said it, I didn't. So a lot happened this week, and there's a lot for us to get into, and particularly we are now, I think, a little more than 2 weeks into, what I think I'm starting to see the press refer to as George Floyd's America, an America that is really grappling with the realities of police abuse and racism. And I want to get to that. But before we get to that, I think we should check in on the other pandemic, or as Boston has officially declared, public health, I'm sorry, not Boston, the other pandemic that we're facing, COVID-19. Currently, a lot of people phoning in on this are all in, states that we're all coming from either California, New York, or Pennsylvania, states that are slowly reopening. The president's COVID-19 task force has not held a public press briefing in more than 40 days, but we are starting to see numbers tick up in states, particularly in red states, and particularly in red states with strong urban centers like Florida, Texas, Arizona, North Carolina, South Carolina. My sister lives in Houston, Texas, and Harris County, where Houston is located, is now at, I believe, the second highest level of concern that they could have on their alert system on COVID-19 spreading. This, I think, because it's no longer on the front page, we sort of acted like it was over. This isn't over, I think, is a fair description to say where we're right now. And I'm curious, particularly as we see this tick up in parts of the world that, the president's party have a lot of leadership and authority and control over. Why don't you think we're talking about the reality of those numbers as much? What do you think's at work here?
Can I speak? Can I start?
Please.
I think three things. Number one, bad news is not good news. And I know that's dumb, but we are in a re-election year, and this president's in the fight of his life. So why would you want to be talking about pandemics when you could be talking about
racism?
Racism and fake news and moving your convention from North Carolina because the governor there is worried about social distancing and having 20,000 people in an arena, which he should be, and moving it to Jacksonville, where you've got all kinds of people. And again, I moved up to New York from Florida and spent 19 years there, where, again, you've got a governor who is a Trump supporter who doesn't even want to release accurate numbers, and fired, the woman who was tracking all the numbers because she wouldn't, talk about the real numbers that they were facing in Florida. I think this pandemic is going to turn this election on its head. I think it already is. And I think my hope is there's nothing he can do about that. But I know I'm a hopeful person.
Yeah, your optimism is greatly appreciated.
I agree with Anne, and particularly her last point on the pandemic turning the election on its head, and that's scary in a number of ways. One of the ways is that if you, given the way things are looking right now, between the pandemic, between George Floyd, between the economy, a lot of the numbers, the polling numbers, are looking very, very good for Joe Biden. But we're about 5 months from the election, and the spike we've been seeing in terms of cases, and particularly in places like in Arizona, cases is a very confusing word, because you don't know if the increasing cases is just because of testing, or whether it just means that there are more people getting sick. As a flat
Anyone
number.
who tests positive is technically a case, even if you're in good health otherwise and just have to go home.
but the real the number that there are two numbers that are really hard to gainsay. One obviously is deaths, but the other one is hospitalization. And hospitalizations are become a real problem in Arizona. I think Phoenix is getting to the kind of the danger zone in terms of running out of beds. So if things and this, by the way, is not the second wave. This is like this is just the latest the latest ripple of the first wave. The problem is, and we're seeing it, so that's coming in the Sun Belt states. The places that have seemed to have batted it down, New York is down to 32 deaths. I mean, it's done a really, really good job. We are seeing even on the streets of New York, not just the protesters, just other people suddenly walking around, congregating, many without masks, because they feel, okay, we've gotten through this. We're in the clear. And if come July and August, and we suddenly and things start, the infections rates start going back up in the places that thought that they had beaten it, plus these other places, and now on top of that, it's going to be a lot harder to shut the economy down. We are going to be in a real crisis moment, and I'm not necessarily sure if that will necessarily redound to Biden's benefit, because if you put that in with the fact that people may still be out there protesting and they haven't quite gotten whatever they want, we could be in for a really, really ugly summer.
Can I just make one more point on this?
Go ahead.
So here's the other thing. As somebody who is tested positive for COVID and is dealing with the effects of it, what happens to all of those people who are still sick? Do they go on disability? Do we see a second wave of, let's say, recession to the US government because all of these people now who are still sick 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 weeks into this, because I don't think we're going to know about what this illness does for another year. They can talk about a vaccine, but I am telling you, I'm on groups on Facebook watching people who have the same symptoms as I do and the residual effects. Do they go on disability? Do they get SSI? Is this the second wave of recession because the first wave isn't getting well, and then you've got all these yahoos who have gone to Florida with their second homes and now come back to New York and got sick in Florida, and we see a second reinfection rate? Because I think that's coming in July, folks. I really do.
And they sent us each $1,200 though, so I feel like they've done everything they can at this point.
If I'd only filed my taxes last year.
Oh man.
Has everyone here been tested?
I have been.
Has anyone not been tested?
I have not. There is a family center across the street, and I'm planning on within the next couple of days going to see if I've got any antibodies, but I have not been tested.
I have not. I just traveled for a few days, so I'm probably going to go get tested just to be on the safe side. Nate, you just got tested this week, right?
I got tested yesterday. Was it yesterday or was it 2 days ago? I think it was yesterday. 2 days ago. It was 2 days ago. So I should be getting my text anytime telling me whether or not I'm positive. But I waited in line at Dodger Stadium in my car for an hour and a half. Right. And it was there's a lot of people getting tested. So as far as this notion of the numbers, as Robert, you were talking about, is a lot about how many people have been tested and how many people haven't, right? And I know a lot of people, like the numbers in Los Angeles are pretty high, but there's a lot of testing going on here, and a lot of people lining up to get tested. So it's hard to say.
Yeah, it's same in New York. I think every city MD in the city, which is a series of like private of small community health clinics, have testing capacity at this point. So even as things are getting better here, we'll probably see a slight uptick in cases. Although I think this week, most of we've seen nothing but downtick in cases, which means that a lot of the staying home has worked, even as we are starting to see increase of testing.
How great would it be for the show if I got the text in a couple minutes.
Yeah.
saying
I'm
that
hoping this
positive
is
for COVID.
Yeah.
look.
Bad for me,
Um,
good for
We
Yeah,
did
because
a-
it took me. Because it
Either
took me.
way.
I was on the second day that New York opened up testing. It took me almost 3.5 weeks to get my test back.
Oh, really?
And so I am praying, you guys. You know, they hopefully they've worked out the kinks, but yeah, it took forever.
I would like to speak
go
to
ahead.
the topic real quick. I think it's a failure in leadership in red states. You're supposed to, at the
Yeah.
very least, keep your people informed and safe, and they did not do that. And now, when they used to like cut corners before, the evidence wasn't so upfront. But in the midst of a pandemic, as we're seeing these numbers climb, it's just because they didn't take it serious, and they like empowered the people there to keep congregating and meeting like a pandemic wasn't sweeping the nation. So that's my feedback on the uptick in red states right now.
It'll be. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Second thing is,
I was just gonna say it'll be
Hannah the Nate.
yeah, I recently got, one of my comedy friends sent me a link to get antibody testing through the city. So I signed up, got an appointment. It wasn't at one of the city MDs. It was at a medical center. I was in and out in like 30 minutes, and I got my results 3 days later. And I did.
Right.
I'm positive for antibodies, but
Oh, God.
Oh, you are. That's great. It'll be interesting to see when these smaller red state parts of the country where the hospitals are not equipped for a lot of people to be showing up at once. It'll be interesting to see if the red state politicians start changing their tune.
Well,
if
but
Trump
yeah, Nate, you have to be careful when you talk about the quote red state politicians, because you've got places like Alabama. The governor is a Republican, but one of the places with some of the serious outbreaks is Montgomery, where the mayor is a Democrat, and there are a number of these states, a number of smaller medium-sized cities that are in red states. They have Democratic mayors, and there's a conflict. There's a tension going on between what the mayors say that they need and what the governors are providing.
In a lot of these some of these situations, the governors are not allowing the smaller, the cities to shut down. They're saying you have to stay open in some of those instances.
And I think, I will say, we mentioned this happening in a few red states. North Carolina, arguably a red state, constantly on the cusp of being purple. I will say, they have a Democratic governor who has done, by all accounts, a pretty good job, but he's still seeing an uptick. And part of why he's seeing an uptick is because they have increased testing in North Carolina. But also part of it is, I will say, the reason it hit, New York and California first is because we're the ports of entry to the country, big populations. So this was naturally going to go to some of these other states and get there later. And I won't just be fair to the state with the Democratic governor. There are a few, I think Texas, initially tried some stuff that, for Texas were pretty, people were kind of surprised. They didn't do as strong of a shutdown job as other states, but they took
Governor
it early.
DeWine in Ohio.
Yes, as well. I point to Texas because they sort of did an early, not quite full shutdown, but they tried more than I think people thought they did. And then they were like, all right, there's no cases. We can loosen restriction. And it turned out it was because the cases hadn't gotten there yet.
I'm glad Ann brought up Ohio, because there was a rather troubling episode that happened this past week, where Ohio's health director, it's a woman, and I'm sorry, I'm just drawing a blank on her name, who by all accounts was working in partnership with Governor DeWine, and had done a really good job in terms of controlling infections, communicating well on the importance of the shutdown and so forth. And now they've been coming out of they've been reopening over the last several weeks. She was basically hounded out of her office, and she resigned. She resigned this past past week because she was getting practically death threats because there were people who were basically didn't like the direction that she was giving in terms of putting out information, making a cautionary opening, and so forth, and so she's left now. I mean,
same thing happened in Orange County. She had to resign because she was getting death threats. People camped outside her house. It's madness.
The name of that woman in Ohio, by the way, Robert George, Amy Acton was the person.
Amy Acton, I
Governor DeWine has kept her on as his she's left the official leadership post, which I think was of one of the state departments, but he's keeping her on as like his top medical advisor. Craig, I want to just check with you before we dovetail to a place where we can really attack the Republicans, which is Florida. But Craig, thoughts on the general state of affairs?
Well, the hardest part is, for me, it's been getting tests. I don't know where in Philly I can get a test, so that's the only reason why I haven't been tested yet. My place of business opened up last week. It's supposed to be the big reopening, and I had to go in to make sure that everything was all set and everything, even though this state of Pennsylvania hasn't given us the all clear to go back to work. There was a testing station. I get my temperature checked every time I go into my workplace. But when they did this grand reopening, nobody showed up, and with good reason. And the only people were there were me and my team, and we had to take all the chairs out of the boardrooms. So a 10-person boardroom is now a 3-person boardroom. A 4-person room is now a 1-person room. So to make sure that the entire building, all 4 floors, have enough social distancing, so when people do come back, they can sit for the appropriate 6 feet away from each other. I don't know where or when it's going to be efficient for everyone to get tested, or even for everyone to come back. I don't think I'm going to see most of my coworkers until 2021. And by the end of this month, hopefully, we'll be in yellow. So right now, everyone in Pennsylvania wants to sing "We All Live in a Yellow Quarantine."
Very nice.
I didn't sing it for copyright reasons.
Thank you. I got flagged on that last week. So let's talk very briefly though. We mentioned you can debate whether or not every red state deserves to be put through a political spectrum. But Anne, you alluded to this before. Let's talk very quickly about the situation in Florida, which is Rebecca Jones is one of the top public health advisors there who resigned because she had been asked, in her view, to sign off on. She's been asked to sign off on Florida's dashboard on the metrics for COVID-19, which has been held up by some of the folks in the Trump administration as sort of like one of the best dashboards out there. And she resigned because she felt that she was being asked to sign off on numbers that I think it was infection rate had been undercounted and the testing rate had been overcounted. Right. And now she's created her own dashboard that is considered by people to be more accurate, which is rough news to have come out this week, weeks after we've seen, after reopening efforts that happened in Florida. Governor Ron DeSantis is who she reports to, who we, may recall famously referred to as the guy who might not be racist, but the racist thought he was racist. What do we think of the situation in Florida? Who's going to Florida anytime soon?
The NBA, apparently.
Yeah, I guess the entire NBA about to get infected.
I mean, I have family in Florida.
Go ahead, Nate.
I have family in Florida, and I lived in Florida for a good while. Yeah, I mean, LA's opening up, but I'm still not leaving my house. Even though I can go to a restaurant, doesn't mean I'm going to a restaurant. To your point, Craig, like people aren't showing up because, if you read the news and you read what the experts are saying and you look at how the cases are spiking, regardless of how accurate the testing is or not, it's like quite the risk to take. I mean, I'm fortunate that I write from home and make money that way, but I feel bad for people who don't have that luxury.
Right.
Yeah. No, same. I work from home, and I'm, most of my job I could do from here, so I'm very.
I think a lot of employers are trying to figure out how to make that work for everyone, but in retail you can't do that. In the restaurant industry, you can't do that. I mean,
Yeah.
you can do curbside for restaurants, and they're surviving some of them.
Even so, like that's a huge, like the eat-in business and the tips that makes is a huge chunk of that business.
Yeah.
I live above a nail salon. That was one of the retail businesses that got looted when May 30th, and they again had been closed since March, and that's their entire livelihood. And
Right.
if I lived in Minnesota and was white, I'd march on the Capitol building there with assault rifles to get my nails done. But people here still have to deal with that because it was one of the more popular ones in the city. And but people like in a nail salon, they can't be out of work for till the end of the year, and they can't work from home.
Yeah.
The irony for me seems to be like at a time where we need strong leadership, people who are reporting numbers with integrity. Like this isn't a red or blue thing. People are dying and can continue to be dying if you don't stop fucking around. Like at a time where we need good leadership, so they guide us into the shelter in place and guide us out. We're not really getting that. Like, so people are erring on the side of caution, and it's going to continue to have like economic implications because people are like, is this really worth my life? Like, where can I get news? Where can I get facts? And where it's not like people trying to politicize, like we really need clarity and we're not getting it.
And
Well, go ahead, Robert.
No, you go ahead, Ann.
I was just going to say, and the clarity doesn't.
After you.
Yeah, and the clarity doesn't come from Twitter. It's I know, silly me. Being the oldest one on the panel, it's like what app? No, but to your point, Hannah, you're absolutely right. Especially in a time of pandemic or crisis, somebody needs to stand up there and just speak the truth. If the shutdowns are going to be, stay-at-home orders are going to be X, then most Americans can live with the truth. And but because there's been this volleying of, he goes in front of the cameras, meaning Trump, and says one thing, and then goes into his Twitter feed and says another, and my head gets sore watching the ping pong, and there's a part of me, even though I can't stand him, I just, for the sake of the country, because I believe in the office of the presidency, just want one day to be normal. But I guess, that's too much to ask for. But you're right. It's a complete lack of leadership. And then it trickles down to the governors as well.
Well, let me ask you. Go ahead, Robert.
This is something we touched upon a couple of weeks ago, and I think it's gotten worse. Donald Trump is like, it's the scorpion and the frog. It's in his nature. You know what he's going to do, right. So you may as well just discount that. But I got really aggravated over the last couple of weeks, where, with the notable exception of the one MVP we've had in this whole mess, Tony Fauci.
Right.
But you had on the so-called public experts, if they weren't screwing up, like the World Health Organization coming out with numbers that were off on what the actual impact of asymptomatic transmission. They put out a release, and then they had like 2 consecutive days of cleaning up their own release. This is the World Health Organization. They almost ended up making Trump look good when he said he was going to pull out from the organization. But worse than that, you have a number of these public experts who gave the equivalent of doctor's notes on protesting, basically saying, well, because it's warm outside, the transmission may not be quite as bad, and racism is almost as bad of a pandemic as the coronavirus. So we can understand. And look, and I'm not just casting shade. There were a number of the Daily News. The Daily News ran a piece by 3 public experts from New York who made who made this something of this argument, and there were a number of others that basically said that gave protesting a free pass. And I think we may all end up paying the price for that a few weeks from now, because the message doesn't just go out to the protesters. There are a lot of other people out there who may not necessarily be as woke or as politically aware, but what they do see what's going on their TVs, and they see a whole lot of people crammed together. Yes, most of them, I will say, most of the protesters had masks, yes, but they were not practicing social distancing, and these kind of lessons ripple into the broader public.
Yeah, I think I was about to bring up the same point, Robert. That when we talk about leadership, no one gets a free pass here. That these marches, they freak me out when I see them. People yelling in each other's faces, and the police are not wearing masks. A lot of them.
The police are not wearing masks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the 1918 pandemic, I think there was a march of 100,000 people where 20,000 ended up dead or something like.
Yeah, right here in Philly.
In the greatest city in the world, Philadelphia. Yeah, no,
yeah.
It was a parade. It was a parade to World War I believe.
Right.
Oh, this was Trump marching against democracy. Trump's dad. Is that what this was?
Yeah, probably.
Right. Yeah.
It might have been Trump. He's old enough.
That Trump and the KKK were in.
By the way, it was 1918 or 1917 if you're Donald Trump. That.
Right.
Yeah.
Woof. That was not bad. I like that. And I think we talked about a few weeks ago on the show, and this goes back to the idea of the lack of leadership. I think it is fair to say that every leader, across the spectrum has been, there hasn't been a lot of thought to the circumstances we're in as a year-long thing. It was sort of a week-to-week thing. We talked about this a few weeks ago. Right to protest is important. It has to be protected. And there's, a government organization should have been we need to figure out good practices for protesting under pandemic circumstances and send that out there. Not that people would have followed it, but no one even thought to think of, that. Of something for that, and so of course people are just going to do what they always do because they don't know otherwise. What else are you supposed to do?
And it's easy for us to talk about red and blue and whatever, but at the end of the day, I think some of this just might be human nature. That we are our own worst enemies. We're unable to cooperate in the way that we would think that we would all. I talked earlier, not on this, but elsewhere about the sci-fi movies where the aliens come and the world unites to defeat the aliens. That's the science fiction part of it, is that we could all unite to defeat a common foe. It's not the aliens. That's more likely than us actually uniting with each other.
Maybe
Bill O'Reilly would trash from a bunker and just be like, "Can you trust this guy?" Sean Hannity goes on the air to join the aliens. I'm sorry, Robert, go ahead.
No, I was going to make an Independence Day joke.
I beat you to the punch. Well, if the important thing, I guess the thread here is we need strong, good, competent leadership. And have I got a leader for you guys?
Unfortunately, it's 20.
And his name is Donald John Trump, still currently the president of these United States, who this week, among other things, took the bold stance to defend Confederate generals and their history of winning, which I can think of at least one war that they didn't win. And then I think it was Thursday or Friday, he did an interview on Fox News, and he talked about how few presidents besides him had done so much for Black people beyond Abraham Lincoln, and even at the end of praising Abraham Lincoln said, but it remains something it remains to be seen, or we don't know.
What did he mean by that?
The end result
I'd like to know what people. What do you think he meant by that?
Is he saying that was kind of questionable?
The results were kind of questionable of Lincoln, who, again, if I understand,
and he had to be
America, it was emancipation.
He had to be reminded by the Black woman who was interviewing him. Says, "Well, we are free, Mr. President."
And then he said, Trump said in response to that, said, "Yeah, we are free." And I was like, she wasn't talking about you.
What do you mean we, Kemosabe?
I mean, my God, did this guy not study, history in school?
No, he did not. The answer is no, he did not.
He did not, but I think we don't talk about enough is that how the Civil War has been taught in this country. To be fair, it is
True.
often taught as if like I don't know how you learned it. I learned it almost as if like the Confederacy was viewed as like an alien force that came to the South, led a war, we beat them, they got back in their Independence Day ship and left, and racism was over forever. And I learned that on the Upper West Side at a Montessori school.
Oh yeah, I think our country has done a terrible job of teaching us about racism.
Yeah,
Terrible.
As evidenced by the rally in Tulsa on Juneteenth that the president was planning and is planning, but now it's on the 20th. But
Right.
like
he moved it.
Like the question is he just ignorant of the history in Tulsa? And we're like, how could he be? But most of us
the way,
were
Nate,
ignorant of that
Nate,
until the Watchmen came along, right? Like no one taught us about this in school.
Yeah,
I know
it's
about
true.
that.
Well,
Ask me.
and here's another point too.
Yeah,
From somebody who's actually worked for people who have won the White House, you cannot have tweens working in the West Wing. You cannot have people who the median age is 19 and a half, who are going out and speaking with the press, who are doing the briefings, who are
And in fairness, I think Barron is doing a better job than Jared. So I mean, I'm just saying.
But let's talk I think, because Nate raises a good question, because our gut reaction is he just ignorant? And yes, Donald Trump is an ignorant person. So like that's your base level. But
We're
there's
an
a good
ignorant
question.
society.
Yeah, but I think another fair question, though, like, did he plan it that way? Because let's think about it. Like, if you plan a rally in Tulsa on Juneteenth, yesterday he announced huge rolling backs of healthcare protections for transgender people on the anniversary of the Pulse nightclub shooting. Like, maybe it's a coincidence, maybe it's not.
No,
at a minimum, there's someone who works at the White House who knows it's a coincidence and isn't flagging it for him, and that's the kind of person he invites. But I'm curious, what do we think about beyond the president standing up for the Confederacy this week and his now canceled, because it did get moved. I believe last night he tweeted he's moving.
I think it's a mixture of ignorance and incompetence. He's had a lot. He's shown incredible ignorance when it comes to the basic history of the Republican Party. It was 2017. He was at an event. I think it was a black church in Chicago, and he said something like a lot of people don't know. A lot of people don't know that Abraham Lincoln was a Republican, and that phrase, that's a tell of his. Whenever he says something like a lot of people don't know, he really means
didn't know.
I'm just looking.
Right.
He also said, I think
a lot of people don't know that a bidet is not a toilet.
But Stephen Miller knows. Stephen Miller knows. The people who told him to do it on that day, he's not picking the day. He's ignorant, but his people around him aren't ignorant.
But Nate, you're giving him too much credit that he's actually sitting in the West Wing, or that he's actually sitting in the Oval Office. He spends an inordinate amount of time up in the residence, flipping the channels. So when would Steve? You know what I'm saying? Because I'm so outraged about it that he's probably up there in his jammies on Twitter at 10:30.
If we're lucky, he's in his jammies.
Yeah.
What you have to know about this, what you have to be reminded about this president is he won't know anything about what's going on currently. He won't. That's why he's never addressed the George Floyd protests or denounced racism at all, and he doesn't know anything that's going on like right now in our world. But he can recite chapter and verse anything that happened in his glorious past. That's why he doesn't want to get rid of any of the Confederacy stuff. That's why he'll use words like a law and order president, which is word for word what Bull Connor and Miami governor did when he was, trying to beat out blacks in his state or his county with a baseball bat and a dog. He knows that chapter and verse. Anything that happened in his glorious past that had to do with the oppression of people that look like me, or anything that has to do that's pro racism. He knows that left and right. He knew exactly what day it was. He knew exactly what happened in Tulsa.
You think so?
On that day. Oh, I know so. Oh, I definitely know so. He won't denounce anything that's happening in this country now with racism, or come out against it, or offer words of support for the black people that he's done more for than any other president. But ask him about loot him and shoot him. When the looting starts, the shooting starts. That's
Right.
where that comes. That he knows left, and he knows.
But in the interview with the Fox News lady, he not only didn't know where it came from, he thought it came from somewhere else. And when she corrected him, he stuck to his guns. Like, okay, but also it came from this other source.
Yeah, well,
it came from one place.
I think the important thing to note is maybe he knew it, maybe he didn't. He was asked in this interview that we mentioned where he titled himself and Lincoln as the best presidents for Black America. He was asked, about if he knew that he was doing his rally on that anniversary. He initially said yes. Now, maybe he lied in that moment, but it is not lost on me that it took him, most of a day to change his mind. So that means for a brief period of time, he said he knew it was falling on the same day and was fine with it. And that is, I think, an important thing. Hannah, I want to make sure we get your voice in on this as well.
Oh, thank you. Okay. For me, Trump perfectly embodies American ignorance when it comes to history, American history. Like, Trump doesn't know anything about American history. He didn't run on being an educated person. He ran on being an aggressive person. So it doesn't surprise me that there are gaps in his knowledge. What the office asks is for you to be for Trump to be better than what he is. For my peace of mind, I've accepted that he is who he is and will continue to be that. So nothing about this surprises me. It fits the way he operates personally. I think what's valuable in it is that now we have a platform to talk about racism in America. Now we have a platform to talk about how history is taught, how the Civil War is taught, not just in private schools, but in public schools. How do we teach children about the origins of America? Take somebody like Jefferson, who I've studied on my own, and he's popped up in different comedic bits that I've done. Somebody who embodies American excellence and exceptionalism, and also that duality where he was raping a slave and having children that he would never claim. And the best he could do was let them try to run to freedom and not look. So it's just until we can see all of American history, what is amazing and awesome about America and what's heinous and devastating about America, it's hard to have a conversation around it.
Yeah. To this day, the Monticello Foundation or whatever they still don't acknowledge his ancestors.
I think they have started. I did a little research. I think they have started acknowledging his kids. Now, do they get a cut of the money? I don't think so, but
there's a part of Jefferson's white descendants who have actively reached out to the black descendants, and there's a part that have actively
a couple
not
of them.
out.
I think
that have been no, I don't think that's right. I saw 1770.
And Hannah, to your point, even Lyndon Johnson, who gets credited with the Voting Rights Act, had to be tugged and dragged along until Kennedy assassination. He became president and still didn't want to do it, because of the Southern Democrats, but gets credited with it because he did sign it into law. But again, you're absolutely right. A complete duality of what we know. Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. Well, yeah, but there was a lot of other stuff that went on.
Well, that speaks to the reality.
But that's a little bit. That's kind of.
Hang on one quick second, Robert, because that does speak to reality of the American presidency that we don't see in Trump, which is to say exactly as you said. Lyndon Johnson is a guy. I talk about this a lot. How my mom protested against the Vietnam War, hated Lyndon Johnson. Then she became a social worker in the Bronx, and there was a woman she worked with, a black woman, who had a framed photo of Lyndon Johnson in her living room because, as she viewed it, he was one of the few white men who gave a damn about black people. And then years later, my mom went on a trip to Vietnam, met an old man there to whom Lyndon Johnson was Hitler. And my mom will always say, which of the three of us was wrong? None of us.
Right.
Now with Trump, there's no good side to him. With every president, even with George W. Bush, I'm seems like he was a good husband, and I think
actually,
has done, and I think did some credible work on support to Africa. Like, you can point to a good thing about almost all of them.
But even then, like the AIDS, medicine that he funded or whatever, it still went to the right companies. They didn't get the cheapest medicines. They still cronyism.
They don't pay ex-presidents very well. So, Robert, go ahead.
No. I was going to make I mean, this is a point. This is a point I think you'd made a couple of weeks ago, and I was going to reiterate it, but you reiterated it yourself. Well, that when George W. Bush goes to various countries in Africa, opposite of the Lyndon Johnson Vietnam example, Bush is treated like a hero. He really and legitimately so because of what he did. He did with AIDS therapies and vaccines and so forth. You're absolutely right that most U.S. presidents are like the country. It's patriots want to say red, white, and blue when the real color of the country is gray, because there's a lot of great. What?
That's really good.
It's really good.
That's a good insight. We just figured out a chapter title for your
He knows he's good. Don't feed it. Don't feed it. He knows he's good.
Maybe Cuomo won't have your legs broken for this.
Yeah.
It's an amazing country. All kinds of faults. But because of our diversity and our we're a messy family, if you want, we managed to do certain things that other great powers haven't done. And of course, we are incredibly imperfect, and we elect incredibly imperfect individuals.
Right.
Word for it.
Then we have the unique case. I mean, the truly unique case in Donald Trump, and that really, because you have to go back to some of the one-term presidents before Lincoln to find some. Oh, what a cute little cat!
Craig, introduce your cat to the audience.
Sorry, America. This is Amber. Amber, this is America.
Oh.
Good to see you again, Amber.
I think, to your point, Robert, that Trump is the only president that we can think of, certainly in the modern era, who is completely self-focused. W may have been incompetent, or he may have been his mind might have been not in the right place, but he was still trying to do something good.
Let's call it imperfect.
That's much fairer than Oliver Willis gave.
To the best of his ability, minus whatever laziness he might have suffered from, he was trying to do the best job he could do. He believed in something other than, I need to get reelected, and that's the difference.
That's definitely true. Speaking of, let's transition very quickly to people who did not get reelected and talk a little bit about the rough week for the Confederacy. This week, NASCAR announced that they would be banning the Confederate flag from NASCAR events. It's a symbolic gesture, but as someone who married a woman whose family is a short ride away from the NASCAR Motor Speedway, I know what a huge deal that is. That's telling a sizable number of your base, don't bring them here, and that's a huge deal. This came on the heels of a lot of other organizations making similar moves in the direction of racial justice and social justice. And then late this week, the United States Senate, while figuring out a military bill, I forget it was a defense spending bill or something, but a provision in it that Elizabeth Warren pitched, but that Republicans on the Senate Armed Service Committee got on board with, and more conservative ones than I expected. I think it was Mike Rounds from South Dakota or North Dakota, I forget, one of the Dakotas, was very supportive of a bill that will, within the next 3 years, I think, remove Confederate general names from every Army base, or at least a sizable number of Army bases across.
I think like 9 of them.
I think there are 10. There are 9 or 10 of them, and I think they would basically create. It's almost similar. Ann and I will remember this because we're the old people on the panel. Going back 25 years ago, when they had to figure out ways to close down military bases in a way that was that protected people politically. they would create a commission that would figure out what kind of steps you want to take to change the names of all of these military bases that are named after Confederate. And by the way, I found out just within the last 24 hours from a friend of mine who we went to school together, and he's also a veteran. Because I was wondering, how was it that we ended up with military bases that are named after after Confederates? And apparently, it goes back to World War I and World War II, when it looked very clearly that we were heading in the direction of going to war, and to get the representatives and senators on board for a war effort. The president at the time, let's see, Woodrow Wilson for World War I, and I'm assuming FDR for World War II, basically said, okay, you want to change the name of this military base here, so, wartime effort.
Wow.
And so that's why we ended up with the names of a number of Confederate generals. So there you go.
I didn't know that.
Great tip.
Thank you for educating.
That's how you win those votes.
But
At the same time. Sorry,
unfortunately, what they did was name it after a bunch of losers.
Right.
And from people that didn't win anything and didn't want any part of the United States.
In a rough record.
And what NASCAR did was just take away half their fan base, because it cut their attendance in half, because Confederate flags and NASCAR go together like, I don't know, racism and white people. So you need those two great tastes that taste great together in order to have a successful sport.
I wonder how much of their thinking at NASCAR is like, let's open the wound to solve the disease or whatever. Like, they're gonna bleed some fans for a while, but unless they do this, their ceiling's always gonna be just so high.
And there is I don't have the exact stats, but at least in North Carolina at the NASCAR Motor Speedway, like there is a notable uptick of black fans. So there's probably, as much as it was a symbolic and I think decent, noble gesture, there's also a smart business consideration of we live in a state that has a large black population. Let's get some of those people in here spending money.
Yeah, and
I mean to say those people. I want to apologize right now.
And the governing body, International Speedway Corporation, which is located in Daytona, Florida, they don't do anything without seeing the bottom line. So I agree with you, Tom. They saw a financial benefit to this as well, or they wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
No, NASCAR started to do this after the church shooting in 2015.
Really?
And yes, in fact, it was at that point that they started to ban the Confederate flag on cars and in the stands themselves. But they tried through persuasion to encourage fans not to do tailgating with the flag and stuff like that. That part backfired, and NASCAR backed down. So what they're trying to do now is go even further and basically saying it's a complete ban. The thing is, right now, there are no races with fans because of coronavirus. So we'll have to see, pardon the expression, when the rubber hits the road, when the fans actually come back, whether they...
Well, it's always
fun. That one, what do you
I always find it sort of just insane, or I don't know what the right word is, but like people mostly people on the right who get so upset at companies doing these sort of social progress moves, whether it's NASCAR or divesting from gay conversion companies or whatever they do, or taking Gone with the Wind down so they can put it back up with disclaimers and context. Like, oh, I'm so outraged. Like, this is capitalism. This is why it's happening. It's because they want to have a broad fan base. They don't want to get boycotted. They want to make money. And if you don't like that, you don't like America. F you.
Well, and can I just say this too?
Nicely done.
Gone with the Wind also got Hattie McDaniel, the first African American woman, an Oscar.
Yeah,
You know,
but she wasn't allowed to attend the ceremony until Clark
Yeah.
Gable said, "I'm not going to go and let Hattie go." And when Hattie got there, she couldn't even use the main entrance with her white co-star. She
yeah,
had to come
that's
out to the
right.
kitchen
You're right, Craig.
They
and
kept her out in the lobby until she won, and then they brought her. Oh, wait, you won, so now you get to go inside.
Yeah, so I'm not taking away from her because Hannah McDaniel
Right.
is the first African American of any sex to win an Oscar for her role in Gone with the Wind. That shouldn't take away from her achievement, but despite her achievement, she was still treated less than anyone
Right.
else.
But also,
Right.
we're not talking about the government not allowing people to ever watch that movie again. We're talking about a company taking it off their streaming services for enough time to put it back up with disclaimers and context around it. Like, that's something to be pissed about, or that's Fox's big talking point for the day?
Right.
And I think that's a important. I wanted to talk about this. I'm glad you brought it up. It's like I think when we get this debate, like with art, you know, a thing I always got trained. I worked for Marvel Comics for a few years, and a thing they always trained was like, remember, like this is half art, half commerce, right? And like you think about like Gone with the Wind, like if I were teaching a film class on like the history of film, like you'd have to at least show scenes from that movie because of its impact. But I also would, you know, if I were running a movie theater in a small town, and they're like, "Hey, it's Black History Month to play Gone with the Wind," I'd be like, "Not going to be doing that." Like, you know,
I mean,
and I think
far as
that's
that.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No,
I was gonna say,
no,
as far as that goes, along with the idea of, you know, this whole idea of like we can't erase our history and we can't take the Confederate statues down because it erases our history. What about all the history that was erased in favor of movies that were all white people or leaders that were only white people? Like, our history is erased all the time. Like,
yeah. Well, I think I think about, and I'm sorry
Also,
to.
Nate, you might say it was whitewashed. You just might say that.
Very nice.
right.
But the thing I think about a lot, like when we think about the Civil War, like we talk about, if you take those statues down, it's erasing history. I feel like the history of the Civil War has always been like, Civil War ended, one of the greatest heroes of that war, Abraham Lincoln, got murdered, and the greatest villain
Right.
got monuments. And so, you know, like I think you look at barely, and I think, you know, Hannah, you brought this up before, how we teach history in this country. Like, I can't remember much about what I was taught about what happened between the end of the Civil War and like World War II. Like, I feel like
I can tell you what happened.
well, no, we sure, but I
Right.
feel like most American schools, it's like, and then nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, big gap.
Right.
And
And the Civil Rights Act, we did it again.
like
Yeah,
we're
so good.
I'm just looking at your Philly. I was looking at your Philly stuff, Craig. Like, I was like a young man in 1985, or a teenager, and I never even knew about the police bombing an entire neighborhood in Philadelphia out of existence. Like, how is that not even on the news? Like, it's insane how little we know.
That was
go
with
ahead.
a black mayor, by the way. That was with a black mayor.
Yeah.
Right.
And I had to move. My grandmother lived 2 blocks away from that. It was in Osage Avenue. It was May 13th, 1985, when it happened. And it made Nightline, so it made national news.
Right.
And it was 60 homes were destroyed, 24 lives were lost, and that gets glossed over. But that was due to racism and about the cops back there in Philly. And the only good thing that came out of that was Live Aid, because we needed something good, and Live Aid came 2 months later, and so
Right.
we'll just ignore that because
That's the history that's been erased.
I agree.
Don't worry, we're not going to forget about the Civil War. I think we'll remember.
Yeah.
But
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Hannah.
Nate, I just wanted to underscore that because we were all kind of cross talking. You know,
Right back to
Philadelphia had a lot of bad white mayors, but they've also had in balance. They've also had bad black mayors as well. I mean, Wilson Good was the guy that dropped the bomb on Move. So I mean, that's partially about racism. It's also partially about can we say, I don't know, general fuck-uppery?
Sure.
Yeah.
You can say whatever you want. This is still America. Last time I checked.
Yeah.
And to his credit, Wilson Good just wanted them out of the neighborhood, and being a mayor, he delegated and he said to the police chief at the time, whose name escapes me, you take care of this. So when he dropped it on the bottom, it was only supposed to be on one building. The thing is, it's a row home and they're all connected.
Right.
So one house turned into the next house, turned into the entire block, turned into the houses behind them. And next thing you know,
and I'd add,
and honestly, the like the organization, the MOVE organization, and the decision to get them out of there, and the incompetence in which they tried to accomplish that task, isn't the story. To me, the story is how little of us know about this thing that happened to the black community.
Yeah, I know it because of a plaque that they have up near there that I saw once when I was out for a walk when I was a junior in college. So, and I would say, like, Robert, you make a good point criticizing Mayor Good, but I would add that, like, it also speaks to the disproportionate power that the Philly Police Department had over the mayor's office at the time. Hannah, you had a thought that you wanted to share before.
Yes, this is great conversation. Thank you, everybody, for your perspectives. When it comes to systemic racism, to the victors go the history, the narrative, and it's by no mistake that that these portions of history are left out, because to be a victor and to be super proud of the actions you've taken, you can't look at the horrible atrocities that have happened to Americans. We're talking not just about Black people, but Black people in the American dialogue. These are Black stories lost that are now, we're kind of looking at it and we're piecing these things together. When it comes to removing the Confederate flag, yes, it's the commodification of the movement. They don't want to lose, I think it's the commodification of the movement. They don't want to lose certain revenue streams. So now they're making the move, when at any time before this, they could have also done that. Right now, they are doing that. So that's not lost on me, but I also appreciate that it's happening because I did my military training in Texas and in Mississippi, where people would proudly fly those flags. I have wingmen that I know, that I love, who are my brothers, who had those flags on their car. And for them, the history that they were taught, like, oh, this is a symbol of our pride, I'm not racist, blah, blah, blah. And I would say, that's great. But what that flag symbolizes to me is you're not welcome here. Right. And you know what happens if you come here? Nothing good. So
just a quick rejoinder on that. Your point, and I think it's a good one, that history is written by the winners. The sad part of American history is that the Civil War is the one area where that wasn't true.
Yeah.
Because for whatever reason,
because they killed Lincoln as soon as it was over.
But this is the point. We had basically about a 20-year period or so after the Civil War. You had Reconstruction.
11 years.
What?
Reconstruction lasted 11 years. Slavery lasted for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Reconstruction lasted 11.
11 years. So in that brief little period, you had a couple of Black senators who were elected by state legislators and things like that. You got the 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments ratified, and so forth. And then the North, which defeated the South, but because they decided to take Abraham Lincoln's speech at his word and said, charity for all and malice towards none, they basically let the South off the hook. They said, okay, you've been punished enough, even though this is a war where our side got slaughtered, your side got slaughtered. Okay, we're all together now. You go about your business. The second the North leaves, each of the southern states start imposing Jim Crow laws, so they can basically get the same system that they had before, just under a slightly different name. In any other kind of a war like this, the winner would have not necessarily raised the loser to the ground, but would have made it very, very clear what what the new program was.
Yeah.
I'd like to speak to
Best
that.
case scenario, Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis would have been in jail for the rest of their lives. Like that's the general.
That's the least that should have happened.
Yes. Well, I'm saying for like least,
Right.
yeah, I guess least violent outcome. But like worst case scenario, gruesome one involves worse. Hannah, go ahead.
I'd like to briefly speak on that because you make so many valid points, Robert. From what I've learned in my educating myself about history is that phenomenon is because racism precedes the Republic. In 1619, before America was formed, 20 slaves had come over on the White Lion. So racism precedes the Republic. And then the narrative of like North versus South, and the North isn't racist, but the South really is. No.
Right.
Yeah.
The North was benefiting from systemic slavery or systemic racism as well. And so that narrative carried on. And actually, Northern racism, in my experience as somebody who was raised in the Midwest, it isn't that F you, get out of here inward kind of racism. It's just like, oh, you're different. What do you mean by different? So it's just like that underhanded, slidey, like that's what we're talking about. And that's what needs to be uprooted and healed as we move forward, is that
the South, sorry.
No, that's it.
Oh, I thought the South lost, but white supremacy still reigns.
There you go.
So white supremacy's won and continues to win, even if the South lost. And slavery was just transformed into a different thing, a different, different form of slavery that wasn't as overt, but still, indentured servitude kind of things going on, and still kind of does.
Which is practiced by our president, which is why he doesn't want to get rid of any of the Confederate statues, even though he has no, Congress can't pass any bills. That's up to the Navy and the Army and the armed forces if they want to rename their bases or take down the statues on their bases. President has no call on that, as much as he may tweet otherwise. One of the other problems that we have is because he believes himself to be a dictator, and because people who voted for him think, oh, he's going to run America like a business. What he doesn't understand is the American people, you're the president, we don't work for you, you work for us. And he still hasn't gotten that. You can't correct him, you can't say anything bad about him, you can't criticize him. In fact, you can't criticize your boss, you can't talk bad about your boss, they'll fire you.
And I think that's the mindset change we need with the police as well, is that they're working for us. And like my whole life, I never thought, oh, the police works for me. No, it's like, I'm afraid of the police, and I'm a white person, but I still feel like, oh, these are guys who want to hurt me if I do something wrong. They're not people who are here to work for me. I've never felt that way.
I think we could talk about this all day. We do have to move on. I'll just simply say Robert, George, and I both once had the opportunity to burn a Confederate flag. And let me tell you something. If you ever have a chance to do it, do it. You feel great afterwards. With that, we're going to call it a day. Before we hop off, we put it to the panel to give folks at home something to read, watch, listen to, or do while they're stuck inside and maintaining social distance. I'll be real quick. I listened to the regular podcast listener of You Must Remember This, which is a great podcast about history of Hollywood. And specifically off this conversation, I recommend their series 6 Degrees of Song of the South, which talks about how even though Song of the South is technically, has been banned by Disney, still elements of that movie are part of every single thing that they do and market to the world out there. And also, because we mentioned before, also mentions a brief period of time where Hattie McDaniel did a one-woman show where she did basically Gone with the Wind from her character's perspective, which is a very subversive thing, and it was really interesting to hear that. So You Must Remember This podcast. Check it out. Hannah, something
Yes,
for folks at home
I have a book that I'm reading that I'm really enjoying. It's called White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism by Robin DiAngelo. She's a sociologist who goes around and she teaches workshops on how to talk about racism. And it's aimed for white audiences, but I'm finding a lot of, I just like how she cuts to the point. And she has given me a lot of ideas and tools to use in these conversations as we move forward and try to gain an understanding of racism and how it's impacted us all. So that's my suggestion, a really strong book so far.
Thank you, Hannah. Ann Herberger, what you got?
Since we're also in Pride Month, I want to recommend a film called a 1961 black and white film called Victim. A great movie that was on Turner Classic. You can get it at tcm.com, about a man and an older woman who are blackmailing gay men in London. And at that time, we know that being gay was a crime. It was called buggery. And so if you were convicted of being gay, you were sent to prison, and usually did hard labor with it. So it's a fascinating way of how we look at our prejudices, if you will, and how they manifest themselves, and how we as individuals can go into ourselves and feel less than. But it's got a great ending, and the acting is great. It's in black and white, and it is one of the best movies I've ever seen.
Thank
Victim
you.
on TCM.
Nate Starkey, something for folks to do at home.
Folks, for something to do at home?
Read, listen to, watch, whatever you'd like.
I don't have anything cutting edge. I recently watched 13th on Netflix, which is a 2016, and it's actually, a lot of people are watching that on Netflix, so I'm not giving you anything unusual, but maybe, if anyone has any suggestions for me on how I can get my racist, or at least racist complicit relatives and in-laws to watch that, I'm open to suggestions, because I think it would do them a lot of good.
Surprise them. Craig, what's your suggestion?
As luck would have it, Nate, I have a show that I just
great.
finished. It's also on Netflix. It's called Black AF, or Black is F. And it's a semi-autobiographical sitcom about the creator of Blackish and Mixedish, Kenya Barris, and his struggle with being black, even though he's a successful black man who's created some of the funniest shows on television. He still struggles with racism and being accepted. And it's 10 episodes, I believe, only 35 minutes, but that is a perfect way, if you are white, to understand that, even though, because one of the pushbacks I get, especially with black professional athletes protesting and everything, and you go, why are they protesting? You're millionaires. What do you have to be upset about? I have to remind them, you're still black. Okay, that doesn't go away with money. And this show, Black AF, completely addresses that. It's just a funny show. The guy who wrote it stars in it, so he's talking from his point of view. It's not an actor whose words he's written. And I definitely, and also the Five Bloods on Spike Lee, also on Netflix.
Five Bloods.
So one funny, one serious.
Thank you, Robert George. Take us home with your suggestion for the week.
Sure. This is actually one that I was going to, we ran out of time last week, so I wasn't able to make a suggestion. A PBS documentary series from, I think, 2014 or 2015 called The African Americans. It's narrated by Henry Louis Gates, and it takes us from Africa all the way into the beginning of the second term of Barack Obama, and so the time could not be better. And Nate actually referenced this earlier, and I think we may have talked about this maybe in the first or second episode of our nice little Zoom series here. But HBO's version of Watchmen, which is completely different from the book, and it plunges into a lot of these areas we'll be discussing. That the first time that a lot of Americans learned about the burning of Black Wall Street in Tulsa in 1921 was in Watchmen, the first episode there. So highly recommend that as well.
And more than that, Robert, it was the opening scene to Watchmen,
and the inspiration for the writer for the whole series.
Yeah.
I mean, aside from the Marvel.
Exactly. So
it was fantastic.
That it was.
That is it for this week. Thank you very much, Nate Starkey, for being here. Thank you very much, Hannah Bell, for being here.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Thank you, Craig Lagans, as always, my friend. Good to see you again. Welcome
Not
home.
forever. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ann Herberger, for being here.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Robert George. And one more quick word of thanks to our friend Kevin Scott for the show animation. Thank you to Joanne Harris for the show theme music. Thank you to Declan Shalvey and Jordy Belair for designing the Electoral Dysfunction Eagle. Thank you to director and my buddy Ned Thorne. And thank you again to the Layoff Kids for the sketch to open the show. And playing us out this week, our old friend, local concerned werewolf Warren Talbot and the Concerned Creepers with their hit song, Humans Are the Monsters. Featuring our pal, Newsboy Phil. Ned Thorne, star wipe us over to hell for the monsters.
Hunt us with your pitchforks, burn us to the ground.
But one thing is for certain, your hatred knows no bounds. You're all so vain and prideful, so quick to collect your pearls. But why do old rich white men prey on boys and girls?
Humans are the monsters. Yes, humans are the monsters. Technically, we're monsters.
But humans are the monsters.
If you're looking for proof, why not look around? I've never met a werewolf dressed up like a clown.
Or murdered an unarmed black man, or forgot the oppressed and the poor, or gave out guns like candy so you can kill some more. 'Cause humans are the monsters. Yes, humans are the monsters.
Satisfy your sponsors. Yeah, humans are the monsters. You design social networks to scream into the abyss. The purpose from the working class made him easy to dismiss. And yes, I'm just a werewolf, but I avoid human meat. Okay? Unlike little Donnie, who shoot you in the street. And yet you morons love him and his stupid family. But 100,000 bodies would beg to disagree.
Humans are the monsters. Yes, humans are the monsters. Celebrate imposters, 'cause humans are the monsters.
America, you're bleeding, but one time you were tops. The stain upon your honor is from your filthy cops. Through this whole dilemma, you've messed with Mother Earth.
Better blow yourself up before she gets you first.
Humans are the monsters. Yeah, humans are the monsters. Technically, we're monsters, but humans are the monsters.
Technically, we're monsters. We know about it.
I could have done that way better.